Anyway, Kevin, teach us, and may this be a refer for all the klalim, for the Kevin does it better. Kevin, take it away.
Okay, this is
Israel.
Dedicated to all the cholim of Klal Yisrael, and also for our beloved King Arthur.
Amen.
Our royal participant in this year. Okay, so continuing with when one can interrupt davening. Now it continues with if one's child causes a disruption in the middle of Amidah so that other people may not have kavanah, he must hint to him to leave. If the child doesn't understand, the parents must take him out of the shul without talking and then continue praying. If during the Amidah a problem occurs that if not fixed immediately will cause him damage, he isn't permitted to interrupt is not permitted to interrupt his prayer. However, if the matter bothers him so much that he cannot concentrate, he is permitted to attend to the problem. If the siddur falls on the floor and the person reciting the Amidah can't concentrate until it is picked up, he must first finish the bracha that he's in the middle of saying and then pick it up. If a person praying by heart becomes confused and cannot continue, he is permitted to go get a siddur and continue praying. If in the middle of praying the Amidah a person is uncertain regarding a law that may prevent him from continuing, such as a case where he forgot to recite a particular passage and doesn't know how to continue his prayer, he may peruse through a book to determine the correct practice, such as at the back of the R scroll, which we're all familiar with. It's got all the different halachas about davening, etc. And this last point, which I'll continue this next time, there are those who allow him to interrupt with speech and inquire what the halacha is. Likewise, if the telephone rings in the middle of the Amidah, he must continue praying. However, if he cannot maintain his kavanah, he is permitted to disconnect the phone and return to pray. And it's quite amazing on that point. Now, people don't know that there's actually aircraft mode or silent mode on the phones. And like even tonight, I was at Mariv, and the phone's ringing, and the guy doesn't stop it. He lets it ring for about a minute. The oak that had the phone. I mean, you either leave it at home or you switch it off, or you put it on aircraft mode. It's not.
Sorry to interrupt. Or you grab that phone and you throw it and you say, that's aeroplane mode now. You see that?
Yeah, exactly. So then you're interrupting your Amidah. Depends if you finished, you can do that.
Yes, providing.
If you finish, you can daven quickly. Yeah. So, okay, there's a bit more to that. So to be continued.
Okay.
That's actually.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so strange because even when you say it nicely, Kevin, people get so defensive. I remember Rav Steinhauer was giving a shir on Pasha shir on Friday morning at a well-renowned shul, and the guy was on his phone talking about this business deal at the top of his voice, and I went to him very relaxed at that point, and I said, "Listen, the guys have wanted me to speak to you because we're trying to listen to words of Torah, and we're learning Gemara, and if you could kindly continue your business call outside of the base midrash." And he started to shout at me and say to me, how dare you, I'm on an important call, how dare you, who are you? And he looked like he was going to the shir to like irritate the group. And I did lose my cool, which was wrong. And he backed off very quickly. And I'm sorry I lost my cool. I just don't understand when somebody points out something.
From guy.
Yeah. When you point
very extremely from. It must be extremely from that. He does everything religiously.
Yeah, he was.
Even though he interrupts the shir religiously.
Yeah. So, listen. So we at this new part at 60b3 in the Gemara. I love talking to you guys. I could end up losing.
Yeah, well done for remembering that we have to start. Yeah, because Gavin and Arthur have to go after this.
So guys, there's this incident in Tanakh, and it's the same incident except in the one case they used the term Bavli, and obviously it's interchanged where it's used for a slightly different word. So I'll just tell you what the incident was. There's a second book of Samuel, chapter 23, verse 11 to 17, and the first book of Chronicles, chapter 11, verse 13 to 19. So in both places, it talks about the event listed within the mighty warriors of David HaMelech, King David, and there's a description of their military feats and their prowess and their abilities. So there's Gemara is going to have this particular discussion because I just want to present one of the paragraphs here. So it says, after him, the last mighty warrior listed, there's a whole list of them, was Shammai, son of Aggai, from the mountain. The Philistines had gathered into a raiding party where there was a portion of the field full of lentils. And that's obviously in the book of Samuel, but it uses the word full of barley in the book of Chronicles. I'll explain why they interchanged the word, but it's not important. The thing of it is the context is exactly the same. And it said, and the people fled from the Philistines. So he made a stand in the middle of the portion and rescued it, and slayed the Philistines, and Hashem performed a great salvation. So once 3 men who were officers over 30 men, because basically each officer was in charge of 10 men under him, went down and came to David HaMelech. It was harvest time, and there was a cave of Adullam near the Philistine stronghold, and there was a Philistine raiding party that was encamped not far there in the valley of Rephaim. They called it the valley of Rephaim, of healing. I mean, there were special properties within that valley. So David HaMelech was, at that stage, he was actually in the stronghold. In other words, in the middle of the area where he gained the territory. And there was a Philistine garrison in Bethlehem, as the worship people call it. David had a craving, and it said, if only somebody could bring me water to drink from the well, or the cistern of Bethlehem, which is in the city gate. So 3 mighty men of David broke into the camp of the Philistine and drew water from the well of Bethlehem, which is at the gate, and then they carried it and brought it to David HaMelech. But he didn't drink it, and he poured it out unto Hashem. Now we're going to see what it means, poured it out unto Hashem, meaning you could just throw it away. What does this mean, unto Hashem? And he said, far be it from me, Hashem, that I should do this. Is this not tantamount to the blood of men who risked their lives, who went to collect the water for me? And he refused to drink it. These are what these 3 mighty men did. So basically what we've got to examine is why would he ask them to do it? So the first thing of it is he didn't. He was just expressing to his men that he was thirsting and craving after the waters of Bethlehem, which is Bethlehem. So one of the reasons is that David HaMelech grew up in Bethlehem, and the waters there are apparently a particular sort of sweetness. Not all waters are the same. Some of the waters can be a little bit bitter. I don't know if you know this, Coca-Cola made from different places in the world tastes slightly different because of the water. I mean, I think Arthur taught me this, that there is a difference.
You notice in South Africa, it's changed completely since 1994.
Yeah, because we've got a sewage problem. If you go to the it smells like a dead body.
It doesn't smell like one. Because it is one.
Yeah, well, if you remember Broomer Lake, I once took officers in Broomer Lake, Kevin, because when the estate agent showed me, I saw ducks on the water and everything, and the Chinese tribes used to throw a couple of dead bodies in that lake. By the time I did my 2 years worth of lease, there were so many dead bodies in that lake, it stank to high heaven. I couldn't bring souls there. Anyway, back to a normal country. Anyway, David HaMelech missed the sweet waters of his youth. So he was just reminiscing. He said, like, for example, you grow up and you have, like, you got a particular fast food joint, or you miss a certain thing from your childhood. He was just saying to them that he missed it. And what they did is they went into the Philistine camp. They risked their lives to bring David this water. And they were men, they were very, very, not only were they brave, but they had huge ability, these three leaders of 13. And David HaMelech refused to drink the water because he said, look, at the end of the day, why should I drink water that you risk your life for? This is not, something about this is not appropriate. It doesn't feel right that for water, it's not as if it was Bekuach HaNefesh, meaning if he was dying of thirst, then there's no issue that it's worth risking life in order to get the clean water. But here it was just a simple craving. So he said, I won't drink the water. Okay. So it does mention that David came, let me just get some of the Meforshim here. So there's a plain meaning of the verse, and there's two distinct incidents, one involving Shammah, the son of a guy, and a Philistine raiding party in a field of lentils. That's the one, or barley. And one involving three mighty warriors. They're two separate stories. Okay? So David HaMelech and the Philistine garrison in Bethlehem. So the Gemara combines the two incidents. And according to the plain meaning, David craved the water in Bethlehem because, as it says, the commentaries in the first book of Samuel, David had come from Bethlehem and therefore desired the waters whose taste he'd known as a child. Since it's obvious from the end of the passage that David had not actually intended that the water be brought to him, his statement should have been understood as basically a wistful thought, wishful thinking. If only I had some of the refreshing water of my youth. But when the three warriors heard that David craved the water, they went on their own initiative, this was the issue, and crashed through Philistine lines in order to give him pleasure. However, the Gemara's discussion understands this passage in a completely different way. So that's a superficial way to read it. And a deeper way to read it is that David HaMelech's thirst wasn't for the sweet waters of Bethlehem, but for the instruction on Torah. Because according to the Ravad, what is Torah also used often as an analogy for, guys?
Water.
Water. Why?
It's flowing. It doesn't. It's not the chas v'chalila stag. It's always there's deeper and deeper levels.
Exactly.
So there's no end to it.
Exactly. So water is just like the water sustains the body and creates life for all of the earth. So too, Torah is oxygen and life for our soul. H2O is hydrogen and oxygen, and water sustains us just like the Torah. And Kevin brought up a great point. He said it's always moving, it's always flowing, and still water, in fact, no one should drink. Why? Because it has developed bacteria. You can't drink still water because at the end of the day, it's toxic. It's only flowing water. Even if you look at a mikveh with rainwater or flowing water, there has to be a certain flow and a growth in order to make sure that
there's no stagnation.
There's no stagnation.
That's like a body of still water. Yeah.
Stagnation is the perfect word. You cannot stagnate. So basically, in Sanhedrin, the courts, it mentions in the book of Sanhedrin, Kevin will remember that the court sat at the city gates. Where does it mention this? In Devarim, chapter 25. And they were located then in Bethlehem. And David needed some halachic guidance because he was having a problem. So the three warriors basically smashed through the Philistine garrison to reach the Sanhedrin. And what they did is they posed the problems which David HaMelech needed resolution to and brought the halachic rulings back to David. So David was horrified because they risked their lives for a Torah ruling under circumstances which there was no justification for such disregard for human life. So they refused to act as they expected him to act. In other words, we're saying there's certain halachic issues that you need clearance immediately, and others that could wait, and that the soldiers, they weren't just normal soldiers, they were these three leading men, shouldn't have risked their lives and taken that sort of initiative. So it could be either understood as he was craving waters from childhood, or craving some clarity halachically, where in Bethlehem, the waters of clarity of halachic guidance were there because the Sanhedrin. You can see it as both ways. So let's just go to the Gemara. David had a craving and said, if only someone could bring me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem, which is in the city gate. So the 3 mighty men of David broke into the camp of the Philistines and drew water from the well of Bethlehem, which is at the gate, and they carried it and brought it to David. So the Gemara understands this passage of speaking of David's wish for halachic guidance from the Sanhedrin. Therefore, the Gemara asks, regarding what halachic issue did David inquire? So the Gemara presents the first of 3 answers. Rava said in the name of Rav Nachman, it was regarding the liability for hidden items destroyed by fire that he inquired. Okay, so guys, now you know why it's brought up, because we've just been trying to grapple with, is the halacha accordance to Rav Yehuda? In other words, you pay for hidden items with destroyed by fire, or is it in accordance with the rabbis who say you do not pay for hidden items that are burnt in the fire? And the Sanhedrin answered them what they answered him. So what does this mean? Is that we're still going to, so let me just tell you what the case was here. Is the case, a person set fire on his own premises and the fire spreads to another person's property where it burns a stack of grain. Hidden inside the stack were clothes. This was mentioned in the 5th daf. Rav Yehuda contends that the first person is obligated to pay for the burnt clothes, while the rabbis maintain he is exempt. Rashi here explains that this particular case became before David HaMelech when he was in the encampment. Wow, what was the situation here? These men set fire that had burnt a Jewish-owned stack of grain. Okay, and the objects hidden within it. So David wanted to know whether he had the Sanhedrin's guidance and whether he was liable for the hidden objects. Okay, now, why did these men set fire that burned a Jewish-owned stack of grain? So we're going to go into that, but in the meantime, let's just see what that actually means. So Rav Huda adds a bit of clarity. He said there were stacks of barley belonging to the Jews in which Philistines were hiding. David wanted to set fire to the stacks to root out the enemy. So he asked as follows, is it permissible to save oneself through the destruction of someone else's property? So again, the Philistines were doing a Trojan horse. They were hiding in the Jewish person's grain, and they were going to obviously make a surprise attack. And David decided to burn the stack of grain. So his question was, are you allowed to do this at the expense of somebody else's property? Guys, what do you think the answer is here?
Tricky one there. I would say yes.
Reason?
But the problem is you can't. Well, because you this is war.
Good. You're both right. You're both right. There's no question that you only have to give up your life for 3 sins. Remember, Gavin, we learned this in the 74th daf of Sanhedrin. What are those 3 sins? Kevin was
idolatry.
Yes. Kevin was
idolatry. Okay, sorry.
Sexual immorality and what's the other one? Jeez. And converting. Oh no, that is what is it? Jeez, what is the 3rd one? Gavin, you know.
Is my blood redder than yours? Is my blood redder than yours? That's what it says in Sanhedrin. In other words,
the 3rd one.
And 3rd one is if somebody had a gun to my head, and I would prevent a bullet from going in my head if I had to take the life of another Jew. You're not allowed to do that because it says what makes you think your blood is redder than the other person? What makes you think your life is more valuable?
Yeah.
That's different to self-defense. So you could argue this is self-defense. It's not. If the person is attacking you, you're entitled to kill them, even on the mere attempt that they're going to kill you and you're not sure. You can even, as far as the laws of Roidif are concerned, if Jew A is chasing Jew B with a gun or a knife, Jew C can kill Jew A. even though he's not directly at life's threat, because he's saving Jew B's life. What cannot happen is a person put a gun to Jew A's head and say, you will save your life if you kill Jew B. That's murder. So you're meant to give up your life exactly before you commit sexual immorality, idolatry, or taking a life in the act of murder. However, as far as damaging property is concerned to save life, you may absolutely do so. So David's question wasn't whether he was permitted to burn the stack, but rather if he was liable to pay for it under such circumstances. Okay? So that's what his question was.
That's why I said war, because if it's war, you don't pay for the spoilage, not the spoilage, the aftermath war.
No, what you don't do is there are spoils of war of the enemy, but this was your fellow Jew, whose property you destroyed in order to burn the Philistines crisp in between. Do you not perhaps maybe owe that Jew back for the damage you caused? Yes or no? We're going to find out. This is not when you're burning your enemy. So
I didn't know it was Jewish. If it's a Jewish person, then it's different. Then I would say yes. You have to.
Because it says in the Gemara, Rav Huna said there were stacks of barley belonging to the Jews in which Philistines were hiding. David wanted to set fire to the stacks to root out the enemy. So he asked as follows: is it permissible to save oneself through the destruction of someone else's property? Obviously, yes, but in other words, do you have to pay somebody else back for the property damage in order to save your life? So the Sanhedrin sent back him the following decision: it is normally prohibited for a person to save himself through the destruction of someone else's property. We don't mean save his life. What we mean is that you are permitted to save yourself, but he must repay the owner for the damage. Okay? Now, what does it mean? Why does it word it like it's prohibited for a person to save himself? It's only saying that if there's a less costly way to save yourself that doesn't entail the destruction of someone else's property, then you indeed prohibited to destroy their property, according to the Yad Ramah. It's only when you don't have a choice. But should you destroy their property, you would have to repay it. But David HaMelech is asking in this particular case, would you, because it's a case of war. So the Sanhedrin said it's normally prohibited for a person to save himself through the destruction of somebody else's property and not pay back. But you are a king, and a king may break through fences around another's property to make a path for himself and his armies, and no one may protest against him. Thus you are permitted to burn the stack of barley. In other words, the path of a king has no limits to its dimensions. So, precisely speaking, the specific right mentioned there allows the king to establish a permanent path to his own fields through another person's fields. Okay, and more broadly, a king holds the prerogative to confiscate property where it's appropriate, such as during a military campaign, as Gavin said. Okay, but David HaMelech didn't want to take this prerogative, even though he was king. So we're going to learn that. But in the meantime, there was a third answer given. And the rabbis, and some say it was Rabbi Bar Mari, said there were stacks of barley belonging to the Jews where David's men stood, and a stack of lentils belonging to the Philistines in the Philistine-controlled area. Okay, I'm going to repeat this again. There were stacks of barley belonging to the Jews where David's men stood, and the stacks of lentils belonging to the Philistines in the Philistine-controlled area. So now David's question, according to Rabbi Bar Mario, some of the rabbis say as follows: is it permissible to take the Jewish-owned stacks of barley so as to place the barley before one's animal's feed, on condition to repay this loss with the Philistine-owned piles of lentils later? So what does this basically mean? Is that you must understand that it's forbidden halachically to steal even a minute amount of property from a non-Jew. David's armies were allowed to take Philistine-owned stacks of lentil because the Jews were at war with the Philistines at that point, and the lentils were spoils of war. But under normal circumstances, you can't, because you have to have good relationships with your neighbors, and also you have to treat your neighbors with the same integrity that you treat yourself. But if you're at war with them, the same rules don't apply. So it says in Ezekiel chapter 33, verse 15, that basically it discusses, it does discuss this idea, but what we talk about here is something a little bit different. What we're saying is that, can you take a Jew's property to feed your animals in a time of war? It's an ordinary Jew, and you're feeding your military horses on condition you pay him back with the confiscated Philistine-owned piles of lentils later. What do you guys think?
I think it's right. I think that's 100%. But I think the only problem is if they don't find any spoils that match it. But otherwise,
I think that's a reasonable thing. Say you do, how do you know you're going to win? Pay back with
and you might not win. So you could be over promising and under delivering.
Yeah. So the Sanhedrin sent in the following decision: the wicked person returns a pledge, repays for his theft. Now, I want to tell you something. That's for the verse from Ezekiel. If it's considered wicked to steal from somebody and then repay them back because you stole something without permission or against somebody's will, you used their things against your will and you decided to pay them back. If that's wicked, can you imagine what theft is when you don't pay them back? If that's the term for wicked, you just force somebody against their will, even though you pay them back. Can you imagine how wicked it is to steal and never pay them back? Just think about that as a level. Huh? So it's prohibited for most people to take the stacks of barley, even if they will subsequently pay for them. Now, the Rosh notes that if the stacks of lentils were available to the soldiers at the same time that they wanted to take the barley, then they would be permitted to ask somebody to formally acquire the lentils on behalf of the barley farmers and take the barley, since lentils are better than barley. So in other words, they were actually going to be paid back better than what they gave the animals. The animals were taking barley and they were being paid back with Philistine lentils, which are better quality, because lentils were generally given to people and barley are given to animals. Only today, when you've got all these nutritious things, do they say that it's healthy to eat barley, etc., but it was reserved for animals generally. But there's a different rule here, because there's this, but the Sanhedrin said most people it's prohibited, but you are a king, and a king may break through fences and make a path for himself, etc., etc., meaning that kings work at a different set of rules. The Gemara obviously compares the second and third answers, and it raises a difficulty, because it's well if you want to switch the Jewish-owned barley for the Philistine-owned lentils. Why? Because Philistine-owned lentils are going to give you more than what you took for the barley. So it's a win for the person you took from. Because it's written in Samuel, in the first book, there was a portion of a field full of lentils, while the other parallel verse in Chronicles says it's written there was a portion full of a field of barley. But according to the one who says that David wanted to burn the stacks of barley where the Philistines were hiding, why does he need those two verses? In other words, the verses seem to contradict each other. In other words, were the Philistines hiding in stacks of barley or in stacks of lentils? So in other words, Rabbi Bar-Mari's explanation seems to make sense, because we know now why in Chronicles there was a mention of barley, and in Samuel there was a mention of lentils. Does that make sense? Because it's resolved by the fact that you're replacing the one with the other. But where there were Philistines hiding in the, were hiding in the stacks, why did you mention in a stack of barley belonging to the Jews. Why would you mention lentils? What does the one thing have to do with another? Does that make sense, guys? That's how the question arose. So it's saying, well, why mention the two if the second answer is also valid? But according to, so the Gemara resolves the difficulty. It says the one who holds the view would reply to you, there were also Jewish-owned stacks of lentils besides the stack of barley in which Philistines were hiding. So the two verses do complement each other. It's not a contradiction of each other. So in other words, the first answer is Philistines were hiding in bales of lentils, in bales of barley, and they decided to cook them out, just so that the Philistines wouldn't surprise it and replace that value for the soldiers. As a king, David Melech didn't have to. And in the other case, it was used for animal feed, where the animals were fed barley belonging to ordinary Jews and were replaced with Philistine lentils, which was a win. So there's no difficulty. Now, there's one more issue. All is well with the one who said that David wanted to burn the stacks, because it's written he made a stand in the middle of a portion and he saved it, since the Sanhedrin told David that he was not allowed to burn the stacks, if not by dint of royal privilege. In other words, you can't burn it and not pay the person back. Of course, you can burn it to save your life, but you can't get off the hook with financial payment, except if you're royalty. However, according to the one who says that David wanted merely to exchange the Jewish-owned barley stacks for the Philistine-owned lentil stacks, what does the verse mean? And it says he saved it. In other words, you can only use that term to say that if you didn't burn it. What was burnt? Basically, if you decided not to feed your animals. It's one thing if you were going to burn something and you didn't. We understand what it means by saving it. But what does it mean if you weren't going to feed your animals? What does it mean he saved it? It just simply means he never made the switch. What does that mean? So, Gavin, whether or not you destructed your fellow Jew's property by burning it or by feeding it to your animals, your decision not to do that is saving that produce. That's all the Gemara is saying. They're saying there's no contradiction whatsoever. So the Gemara then brings just a difficulty with the first answer. All is well according to these two last answers, that the army wanted to burn the Jewish-owned barley stacks and lentil stacks with the Philistines in it, or that they wanted to exchange the Jewish-owned barley stacks for the Philistine-owned lentil stacks. But then that's why there are two verses written in the regard to the stacks, one describing them as barley and one describing them as lentils. But according to the one who says that David inquired regarding hidden items destroyed by fire, why are the verses needed? In other words, what does it matter if there were barley or lentils or grain? Why did you have to be that specific? So Rashi basically said that the question is not asking, for example, about lentils versus barley, but it's talking about saving of produce. In other words, it's after the fact. It was too late to save them because the burning had already occurred. But in other words, it was a precautionary measure. So why ask? Because at the point at which it's burnt, you can still make financial restitution. You're not going to save it in terms of, I'll give you an example. Say the enemy's Kevin in the stacks of barleys or lentils, and you decide, rather let's not take a chance by the time Sanhedrin gets back and let's burn the Philistines crisply. You figure, why take a chance? Once you've killed them and you've destroyed the produce, you can always make financial restitution to the Jewish parties. That's what it means by saving it, even after the fact. As long as the person gets the money back, you're fine. There's no issue with that. So I've got a few minutes and then we're done. Got 3.5 minutes. Quickly, guys, let me finish. So the Gemara concedes that the first answer is insufficient by itself. The one who gave the first answer would tell you that indeed David inquired both about the liability for hidden items destroyed by fire and if one is allowed to save himself with somebody else's property without repaying it back, or if one is allowed to take somebody's produce and substitute other produce. In other words, in that case, pay it back, but take it without permission. So all is well according to the one who says these last two answers. But what about the issue about David refusing to drink it? Because David decided that he wasn't going to use his authority as king based on royal privilege to get out of it. He was saying, listen, I don't want to use my royalty because remember the Jewish people davened for a king, and the prophet was not entirely happy with that, because a king has certain rights which could trample on the rights of individuals, and David didn't want to take advantage of being a king. He considered himself a servant to the people and a servant to Hashem, and he didn't want to use privileges to take advantage. Now also there's a separate tradition from the Beis Din about this halacha, that generally when somebody gives any halachic statement, he should give it in the name of the person who taught it to him. So in this case, David didn't give it the Torah in the name of the three leaders that gave him the halachic statement from the Sanhedrin, even though he could have, because they risked his life for him. So he should have, but they're saying, why didn't he? He didn't for a good reason. Is that when somebody does something reckless, like risk their life, you're allowed to perform a mitzvah, but you're not allowed to perform a mitzvah at the reckless endangerment of your life, because that is that's irresponsible. So David, because they were being irresponsible, and it wasn't necessary to ask the halachic question at that point, or to get him drinking waters, whatever you want to say, he couldn't name the halacha after the messengers that brought it, because they acted in a way that put their own lives in jeopardy as well as the men. The men would have lost three leaders. The other way that you could learn it, which was interesting, the Gemara said that they acted in the name of heaven. And because they acted in the name of heaven, even risking their lives for their king, even upon not being asked to do so, it might have taken away merit if their name had been extolled through the history books. So that was much more spiritual merit that they remained anonymous, actually. That they did it without having that notoriety associated with their name. Does that make sense? So in other words, it was a big merit as well. So there are two ways of looking at it. All right, guys, we're done. I hope you're happy. We've got the Mishnah next, and we've gone through a bit, and we already hit the 61st daf. Well done.
Yeah, well done. Scott.
All right, guys, have a good evening. Arthur, I wish you better, my friend.
Yeah, Arthur, feel better.
Keeper. All right, I hope Hashem blesses you guys with good health. Amen.
Kamm lecha.